The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Captain Sarah Martinez walked through the gates for what everyone believed would be her final day in uniform. Whispers followed her every step, and she could feel dozens of eyes burning into her back. The other soldiers avoided her gaze, some shaking their heads in disappointment, others openly sneering at what they saw as a disgrace to their unit. Sarah had served her country for 8 years, climbing through the ranks with determination and skill that impressed even her harshest critics. She had volunteered for the most dangerous missions, spent countless nights in hostile territory, and saved more lives than she could count. But none of that seemed to matter now. All anyone could talk about was the accusation that threatened to destroy everything she had worked for. It started 3 weeks ago when Sergeant Mike Thompson returned from a mission in Afghanistan. Thompson was a popular soldier, known for his loud voice and bigger personality. He had friends throughout the base and never missed an opportunity to tell stories about his adventures. But when he came back from his latest deployment, he brought with him a story that shocked everyone who heard it. "She's lying!" Thompson had shouted in the mess hall, pointing his finger at Sarah as she sat quietly eating her lunch. "Everything she's told you about her missions, about her kills, about being some kind of war hero, it's all made up." The room had fallen silent as Thompson continued his tirade. He claimed that Sarah had been hiding behind supply lines during firefights, that she had never actually engaged the enemy, and that all her reported kills were fabricated. According to Thompson, Sarah had been padding her numbers and stealing credit from other soldiers to make herself look good. "I've seen the real reports," Thompson insisted, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet dining hall. "She's never killed anyone. She's just a desk jockey pretending to be a warrior." The accusation hit the base like a bomb. Within hours, everyone was talking about it. Some soldiers who had always resented Sarah's rapid promotions and commendations jumped on the story eagerly. They whispered among themselves about how they had always suspected something wasn't right about her record. Others remained skeptical, remembering the time Sarah had shown incredible bravery and skill under fire. But doubt is a powerful poison, and once it starts spreading, it becomes almost impossible to stop. Soon, even some of Sarah's closest friends began to question what they thought they knew about her. The story grew with each telling, becoming more dramatic and damaging with every repetition. Sarah tried to defend herself, but her quiet nature worked against her. She had never been one to boast about her achievements or tell war stories in the mess hall. While other soldiers entertained their comrades with tales of their exploits, Sarah preferred to keep her experiences private. She believed that real warriors didn't need to brag about their actions, that their record should speak for itself. This humility, which had once been seen as admirable, now looked suspicious to those eager to believe Thompson's claims. Why didn't she ever talk about her missions? Why was she so secretive about her deployments? The questions multiplied, and Sarah found herself increasingly isolated. Lieutenant Colonel James Wright, the base commander, tried to remain neutral while the investigation proceeded. Wright was a fair man who had always respected Sarah's service, but he also couldn't ignore such serious allegations. He ordered a formal review of her service record and temporarily suspended her from active duty pending the outcome. "I'm sorry, Captain," Wright had told her in his office, his weathered face showing genuine regret. "I know this is difficult, but I have to follow protocol. These are serious charges, and they need to be investigated properly." Sarah understood the colonel's position, but it didn't make the situation any easier. She was confined to base while investigators pored over her files and interviewed soldiers who had served with her. Every day brought new humiliations as rumors continued to spread and her reputation crumbled bit by bit. The worst part was watching how quickly some people turned against her. Soldiers who had once sought her advice and respected her leadership now avoided her completely. She overheard conversations that stopped abruptly when she approached, saw groups of people whispering and pointing in her direction. The isolation was crushing. Thompson, meanwhile, basked in the attention his revelation had brought him. He held court in the mess hall every evening, regaling anyone who would listen with stories about how he had uncovered Sarah's deception. He painted himself as a hero who had exposed a fraud, someone brave enough to speak truth to power. "I couldn't stay silent anymore," he would say, shaking his head sadly. It wasn't fair to all the real heroes who have actually put their lives on the line. She was making a mockery of everything we stand for. Some soldiers bought his act completely, praising him for his courage in coming forward. They talked about how difficult it must have been for him to expose a fellow soldier, how much integrity it showed. Thompson ate up every word of praise, his chest swelling with pride at being seen as the base's moral compass. But not everyone was convinced. Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, who had served with Sarah on multiple deployments, found Thompson's story hard to believe. She had seen Sarah in action, had witnessed her courage and skill firsthand. The idea that it was all fake seemed impossible to her. Something doesn't add up, Gonzalez confided to her friend, Corporal David Kim. I've been in firefights with Sarah. I've seen what she can do. Thompson's story just doesn't match what I experienced. Kim nodded thoughtfully. He had his own doubts about Thompson's claims. But expressing skepticism had become dangerous. Anyone who defended Sarah was immediately suspected of being part of some kind of cover-up. It was easier to stay quiet and wait for the investigation to reveal the truth. The investigation itself proved frustrating for everyone involved. Military records could be complex and sometimes contradictory, especially for classified operations. Sarah's deployments had taken her to some of the most dangerous areas in Afghanistan and Iraq, places where detailed record-keeping was often impossible. Many of her missions were classified at levels that made verification difficult. Major Patricia Hayes, the officer assigned to lead the investigation, found herself struggling with incomplete information and conflicting accounts. Some soldiers supported Thompson's claims, while others insisted Sarah was exactly the warrior her record suggested. The truth seemed buried somewhere in a mountain of paperwork and competing testimonies. As the days passed, Sarah felt her world closing in around her. She had dedicated her life to serving her country, had sacrificed relationships and opportunities for her military career. Now it all seemed to be slipping away because of one man's accusations. The unfairness of it was overwhelming. She spent long hours alone in her quarters, reviewing her own memories of the missions Thompson claimed were fabricated. She could remember every detail: the smell of gunpowder, the weight of her weapon, the faces of the enemies she had engaged. The idea that these experiences were somehow fake was absurd, but proving their reality was proving surprisingly difficult. The stress began to take its toll on Sarah's health. She lost weight and struggled to sleep, her mind constantly racing with worry about her future. She had nightmares about losing her career, about being discharged in disgrace. Everything she had worked for seemed to be hanging by a thread. Her family tried to offer support, but they were hundreds of miles away and couldn't fully understand the military culture she was navigating. Her father, a retired police officer, was furious about the accusations and wanted to hire lawyers to fight back. Her mother worried constantly, calling every day to check on her daughter's emotional state. "Don't let them break you, mija," her mother would say during their phone calls. "You know who you are, and you know what you've done. The truth will come out." Sarah wanted to believe her mother's words, but confidence was becoming harder to maintain. Each day brought new challenges to her credibility, new reasons for people to doubt her story. She began to wonder if anyone would believe her, even if she could somehow prove her innocence. The situation reached a boiling point when Thompson started claiming he had additional evidence of Sarah's deception. He hinted at having access to classified documents that would prove his case, though he was careful never to show these supposed documents to anyone. The mystery only added to the drama surrounding the case. Colonel Wright found himself under pressure from multiple directions. Some of his superiors wanted a quick resolution to the scandal, while others urged caution in handling such serious allegations. The media had started sniffing around the story, though they hadn't yet gained access to the base or the details of the case. "This is becoming a circus," Wright complained to his aide. "I need facts, not rumors and speculation." But every time we think we're making progress, some new complication arises. The aide nodded sympathetically. "Sir, maybe we should consider bringing in outside investigators. Someone with access to higher classification levels might be able to cut through the confusion." Wright considered this suggestion carefully. He knew that escalating the investigation could have serious consequences for everyone involved, including himself. But the current situation was unsustainable, and he was running out of options for resolving it at the local level. As Sarah prepared for what might be her final meeting with the investigation committee, she felt a strange sense of calm settling over her. She had done everything possible to defend herself within the confines of military protocol. If that wasn't enough, then perhaps her military career was meant to end this way. She thought about the soldiers she had served with, the lives she had saved, and the missions she had completed. Those experiences were real, regardless of what anyone else believed. She had served with honor and integrity, even if proving it had become impossible within the current system. The meeting was scheduled for the next morning, and Sarah knew it would likely determine her fate. Thompson would present his evidence, she would have a chance to respond, and then the committee would make their recommendation to Colonel Wright. After weeks of uncertainty, the end was finally in sight. That evening, as Sarah sat in her quarters preparing for the meeting, she received an unexpected visitor. Major Hayes knocked on her door, carrying a thick folder of documents. Her expression was difficult to read, but there was something in her eyes that Sarah hadn't seen in weeks, a hint of respect. "Captain Martinez," Hayes said formally, "I need to discuss some developments in your case. May I come in?" Sarah stepped aside to let the investigator enter, her heart racing with anticipation. Whatever Hayes had discovered, it was clearly significant. The folder she carried looked like it contained far more information than had been available when the investigation began. "I've been doing some digging," Hayes continued, taking a seat at Sarah's small desk. "Some of your missions were more classified than I initially realized. It took some work, but I've managed to get access to records that weren't available before." Sarah's pulse quickened. Could this be the break she had been hoping for? After weeks of feeling helpless, was it possible that the truth might finally come to light? Hayes opened the folder and pulled out several documents, her expression growing more serious with each page she reviewed. "Captain, I think you need to see these. What I've found changes everything we thought we knew about your service record." As Sarah looked at the papers Hayes was spreading across her desk, she realized that her ordeal might be nearing an end. But she also sensed that the truth, when it finally emerged, would be more shocking than anyone had imagined. The story that was about to unfold would surprise everyone involved, including herself. The investigation had taken an unexpected turn, and tomorrow's meeting would reveal secrets that had been buried in classified files for years. Sarah's reputation hung in the balance, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope that justice might finally prevail. The documents before her told a story that even she had forgotten in some of its details, a story that would soon shock not just Thompson and the other doubters, but the entire military establishment. The woman they thought they knew was about to reveal herself as someone far more extraordinary than anyone had imagined. The truth was coming, and it would change everything. Major Hayes spread the classified documents across Sarah's desk with careful precision, each paper revealing details that had been locked away in the highest security vaults. The fluorescent light overhead cast shadows across the typed pages, making the redacted sections look like dark wounds in the official reports. "Captain Martinez," Hayes began, her voice carrying a weight that Sarah had never heard before. "When I started this investigation, I thought I was dealing with a simple case of falsified records. What I've discovered is far more complex than anyone anticipated." Sarah leaned forward, studying the documents that Hayes was arranging in chronological order. The papers bore classification stamps she had rarely seen, levels so high that most military personnel would never even know they existed. Her own name appeared throughout the reports, but many of the details were foreign to her, as if she were reading about someone else's life. "These are records from Operation Nightshade," Hayes explained, pointing to a thick file marked with multiple security warnings. A joint operation between special forces and intelligence agencies that took place over 18 months in Afghanistan. According to these documents, you weren't just a participant, you were the primary operator. The memories began flooding back as Sarah recognized mission details that had been buried deep in her mind. Operation Nightshade had been unlike anything else in her military career, a series of classified missions so sensitive that the participants were required to undergo memory suppression protocols afterward. The procedure was designed to protect national security by ensuring that operatives couldn't reveal critical details even under torture or interrogation. "I remember pieces," Sarah said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But they told us the memory blocks were necessary. We weren't supposed to talk about those missions, even to each other." Hayes nodded grimly. "The memory suppression was more extensive than you might realize. These files show that you completed 47 separate infiltration missions over those 18 months. Each one targeted high-value individuals who posed significant threats to American forces and civilian populations. The number hit Sarah like a physical blow: 47 missions. She could remember perhaps a dozen clearly, and even those memories felt fragmentary and dreamlike. The idea that she had been involved in so many operations without retaining clear memories of them was both fascinating and terrifying. The psychological profile in your file describes you as having exceptional compartmentalization abilities. Hayes continued, reading from another document. It notes that you were able to maintain normal social interactions and emotional stability even while carrying out high-stress covert operations. The evaluating psychiatrist recommended you for the most sensitive assignments available. Sarah struggled to process this information. She had always known she was good at her job, but the picture emerging from these classified files painted her as something far beyond a typical soldier. The woman described in these reports was a trained killer operating at the highest levels of military intelligence. "There's more," Hayes said, pulling out a folder with Sarah's photograph clipped to the front. "Your assignments weren't limited to Afghanistan. These records show deployments to 17 different countries over a 3-year period. Iraq, Syria, Somalia, Pakistan, Yemen, places where officially the United States had no military presence." The scope of the operations described in the files was staggering. Sarah had apparently been part of a small team of operators who carried out missions that could never be officially acknowledged. They eliminated terrorists, gathered intelligence, and disrupted enemy operations in ways that traditional military units couldn't achieve. "The kill count?" Sarah asked quietly, afraid to hear the answer. "What does it say?" Hayes hesitated before opening another folder. "According to these verified records, you have 137 confirmed kills over your operational period. The actual number is likely higher as some missions couldn't be fully documented due to security constraints." The number hung in the air between them like a physical presence. 137 confirmed kills. Sarah felt dizzy as she tried to reconcile this information with her fragmented memories. Thompson had accused her of having no kills at all, of being a fraud who had never seen real combat. The truth was so far beyond his accusations that it seemed impossible. "How is this possible?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. "How could I have been involved in all of this and not remember most of it?" Hayes pulled out a medical file thick with psychiatric evaluations and treatment records. The memory suppression program was experimental and highly controversial. Only a select few operatives were suitable candidates, and the psychological toll was enormous. According to these records, you underwent the procedure 17 times over 3 years. The medical records painted a picture of a soldier pushed to the absolute limits of human endurance. Sarah had been subjected to chemical memory suppression, hypnotic conditioning, and psychological compartmentalization techniques that allowed her to function normally while carrying the weight of dozens of lethal encounters. Each time you completed a particularly sensitive mission, you were brought back to a secure facility for treatment, Hayes explained. The goal was to allow you to continue operating without being compromised by stress, guilt, or the accumulation of traumatic memories. Sarah studied her own medical records with a mixture of fascination and horror. The reports described her as an ideal candidate for the program, someone with natural psychological resilience and an ability to separate emotional responses from operational necessities. But they also documented the price she had paid for this capability. The side effects. Sarah read aloud from one evaluation. Emotional detachment, difficulty forming personal relationships, periodic episodes of dissociation. She looked up at Hayes with growing understanding. "That explains so much about how I felt for years." The major nodded sympathetically. The program was discontinued after concerns about long-term psychological damage to participants. You were one of only 12 operatives who completed the full protocol. According to these files, 3 others suffered complete psychological breakdowns and had to be permanently hospitalized. The revelation that her entire adult life had been shaped by classified military experiments was overwhelming. Sarah began to understand why she had always felt disconnected from other people, why forming lasting relationships had been so difficult. The woman she thought she was had been artificially constructed through psychological manipulation. "There's something else you need to see," Hayes said, pulling out a final set of documents. These are commendations and awards that were classified at the time they were issued. You have medals for valor and service that have never appeared in your official record. The awards described acts of heroism that Sarah could barely remember. She had apparently saved the lives of captured American soldiers, prevented terrorist attacks that would have killed hundreds of civilians, and eliminated enemy leaders whose deaths had significantly impacted global security. Each citation painted her as a soldier of exceptional courage and skill. The Medal of Honor, Sarah said in disbelief, staring at a citation she had never seen before. They awarded me the Medal of Honor for a mission in Syria. Hayes pointed to the classification stamps that covered the document. It was awarded in a closed ceremony with no media coverage. The mission it recognizes involved infiltrating a terrorist compound to rescue kidnapped aid workers. According to the report, you eliminated 22 enemy combatants while extracting 4 hostages. The details of the mission began trickling back as Sarah read the report. She remembered the compound, the terrified faces of the hostages, the methodical way she had moved through the building, eliminating threats, but the memories felt distant and disconnected, like scenes from a movie she had watched years ago. All of these commendations, all of these missions, they exist in a parallel record system that's completely separate from your standard military file, Hayes explained. As far as the regular military bureaucracy is concerned, you spent those years in routine deployments with minimal combat exposure. The duality of her service record was staggering. In one system, she was exactly what Thompson had described, a soldier with modest achievements and questionable combat experience. In the other, she was one of the most decorated and effective operators in modern military history.
"Why are you showing me this now?" Sarah asked. "Why not just let the investigation continue with the limited records that were available?" Hayes closed the folders and leaned back in her chair.
"Because Sergeant Thompson isn't who he claims to be either. When I started digging into his background, I found some disturbing connections. He's been in contact with foreign intelligence services, specifically individuals linked to several of the organizations you helped dismantle." The implication hit Sarah like a thunderbolt. Thompson's accusations weren't the result of genuine concern about military integrity. They were a deliberate attempt to destroy her credibility and reputation. Someone had specifically targeted her because of the damage she had inflicted on enemy operations. "He's been feeding information to people who want revenge against you," Hayes continued. "The timing of his accusations, the specific nature of his claims, it's all designed to discredit you and potentially force you out of the military, where you'd be vulnerable to retaliation." Sarah felt a cold anger building in her chest as she considered the implications. She had been manipulated and attacked, not because she was a fraud, but because she had been too effective at her job. Enemy agents had infiltrated her own unit and turned her fellow soldiers against her. "How many people know about these classified records?" Sarah asked. Hayes considered the question carefully. "Very few. The program was so compartmentalized that even most senior officers don't know it existed. Colonel Wright doesn't have the clearance to access these files, and neither does anyone else on the base except for me." The situation was becoming clearer but also more dangerous. Sarah was caught between two worlds: the official military, where she appeared to be a modest soldier facing serious accusations, and the classified realm, where she was a decorated operative who had made powerful enemies. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "How do we handle Thompson and his allegations?" Hayes gathered the documents carefully, making sure each page was properly secured. "That's going to be complicated. We can't reveal the classified information publicly without compromising national security. But we also can't let an enemy agent destroy your reputation and potentially your life." The challenge was unprecedented. How do you defend someone against false accusations when the evidence of their innocence is too classified to reveal? Sarah realized she was trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare where the very achievements that should vindicate her were the ones that couldn't be acknowledged. "There might be a way," Hayes said slowly, as if working through a complex problem in her mind. "The investigation has drawn attention from some very high levels of government, people who do have the clearance to access your real records. If we can get the right people involved," Sarah nodded, understanding the delicate nature of what Hayes was suggesting. Resolving this situation would require intervention from intelligence agencies and military officials far above the level of a typical base investigation. It would mean exposing the classified program to a wider circle of officials, potentially compromising other operations.
The risk is enormous, Hayes admitted, but so is the threat to you.
If Thompson succeeds in destroying your reputation, he'll have accomplished something that enemy intelligence services have been trying to achieve for years. As they discussed potential approaches to the problem, Sarah began to appreciate the full complexity of her situation. She wasn't just fighting for her military career. She was caught in a larger intelligence war, where her reputation and safety were weapons being used by hostile forces. The woman who had walked into the meeting feeling defeated and isolated was beginning to understand that she was actually a highly trained operative who had been extraordinarily successful at missions she could barely remember. The accusations against her weren't just false. They were enemy propaganda designed to neutralize one of America's most effective covert operators. But knowledge of the truth and ability to act on it were two different things. Sarah realized that the most difficult part of her ordeal was just beginning. She would have to find a way to defend herself without compromising national security, expose Thompson without revealing how she had discovered his true loyalties, and somehow reclaim her reputation while protecting secrets that could cost lives if revealed. The documents Hayes had shown her painted a picture of a warrior far more formidable than anyone had imagined. But they also revealed the full extent of the forces arrayed against her. Tomorrow's meeting would be just the beginning of a much larger battle for truth and justice in a world where both were more complex than they appeared. The investigation committee meeting was scheduled for 800 hours, but by 7:30, the conference room was already buzzing with unusual activity. Word had somehow spread that today's session would be different from the routine proceedings of the past weeks. Officers who normally had no involvement in the case found reasons to linger in the corridors, and even the base's senior staff seemed unusually alert. Colonel Wright arrived early to find his conference room occupied by people he didn't recognize. 3 individuals in civilian clothes sat at his table, reviewing documents with the calm efficiency of seasoned professionals. Their presence transformed the familiar space into something that felt foreign and potentially dangerous. Colonel Wright, the woman at the head of the table, stood and extended her hand. "I'm Director Catherine Walsh from the Defense Intelligence Agency. These are my colleagues from the CIA and NSA. We'll be observing today's proceedings." Wright accepted the handshake while trying to process this unexpected development. In 30 years of military service, he had never had a base investigation attract attention from multiple intelligence agencies. The fact that they were here suggested that Sarah Martinez's case was far more significant than he had realized. "With respect, Director Walsh," Wright said carefully, "this is a routine disciplinary matter involving accusations against one of my officers. I'm not sure why it would require oversight from your agencies." Walsh exchanged glances with her colleagues before responding. "Colonel, I'm afraid this matter is anything but routine. We'll explain more as the proceedings unfold, but I can tell you that Captain Martinez's case touches on issues of national security that go well beyond your base." As other participants filed into the room, the tension was palpable. Sergeant Thompson entered with the swagger that had characterized his behavior throughout the investigation, but Sarah noticed his confidence seemed to falter when he saw the unfamiliar faces at the table. Major Hayes followed closely behind Thompson, carrying several thick folders that Wright didn't remember seeing before. Sarah arrived last, having spent the morning trying to prepare mentally for what might be her final appearance in uniform. The presence of the intelligence officials was unexpected, but she found their involvement oddly reassuring. Whatever was about to happen, it seemed her case was finally getting the serious attention it deserved. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colonel Wright began formally, "we're here to conclude our investigation into allegations made by Sergeant Thompson against Captain Martinez. Before we proceed with our normal format, Director Walsh has requested to make a statement." Walsh stood and surveyed the room with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to evaluating people quickly and thoroughly. Her gaze lingered on Thompson, who was shifting uncomfortably in his chair, before moving to Sarah with an expression that seemed almost apologetic. "3 weeks ago," Walsh began, "Sergeant Thompson made serious allegations about Captain Martinez's service record. These allegations triggered not only a local investigation, but also reviews by several federal agencies. What we discovered during those reviews has serious implications for national security. She paused to let her words sink in before continuing. Captain Martinez, your service record is considerably more complex than anyone in this room realized. You have been operating under classification levels that require special clearance to access. The missions you completed and the achievements you accomplished have been protected by some of our highest security protocols. Thompson's face had gone pale, and Sarah noticed his hands were trembling slightly as he gripped the edge of the table. The confidence he had displayed for weeks was evaporating as the intelligence director continued her presentation. Furthermore, Walsh said, her voice taking on a harder edge, our investigation into the source of these allegations has revealed some disturbing connections. Sergeant Thompson, you've been in contact with individuals linked to foreign intelligence services, specifically people associated with organizations that Captain Martinez helped dismantle during her classified operations. The room erupted in surprised murmurs as the implications of Walsh's statement became clear. Wright stared at Thompson in shock, unable to reconcile this revelation with the soldier he thought he knew. Thompson himself seemed to shrink in his chair, his earlier bravado completely gone. That's not true, Thompson stammered, but his voice lacked any conviction. I'm an American soldier. I would never work with foreign agents. Walsh opened one of her folders and pulled out a series of photographs and documents. These are surveillance photos showing you meeting with Ahmad Hassan, a known operative for several Middle Eastern intelligence services. The meetings took place over a 6-month period leading up to your accusations against Captain Martinez. The photographs were damning. They showed Thompson in various locations around the base and in nearby towns, clearly engaged in conversation with a man whose face had been circled and annotated by intelligence analysts. The timestamps indicated that the meetings had been carefully planned and regular. Hassan is specifically linked to 3 terrorist organizations that Captain Martinez helped neutralize during her classified operations, Walsh continued. His presence in this area wasn't coincidental. He was here specifically to gather intelligence about her and to find ways to discredit or eliminate her. Sarah felt a strange mixture of vindication and horror as the truth emerged. She had been right to trust her instincts about Thompson's allegations, but discovering that she had been targeted by enemy agents was deeply unsettling. The implications went far beyond her personal situation. The allegations themselves were carefully crafted, one of Walsh's colleagues added. They were designed to exploit gaps in Captain Martinez's official record that exist because of the classified nature of her actual service. Thompson knew exactly which accusations would be difficult to refute without revealing classified information. Major Hayes stood and approached the table carrying her own folders. With permission, I'd like to present some of the classified information that has been declassified specifically for this proceeding. Colonel Wright, you'll need to sign additional security agreements to hear these details. Wright nodded grimly and accepted the security documents Hayes offered him. As he signed each page, Sarah realized that her case had escalated far beyond anything she had imagined. The involvement of multiple intelligence agencies and the declassification of operational records suggested that powerful forces had been mobilized to protect her. Captain Martinez, Hayes began, opening her first folder, you were selected for participation in Operation Nightshade based on exceptional psychological evaluations and combat performance. Over a 3-year period, you completed missions in 17 countries, eliminated 137 confirmed enemy targets, and prevented at least 12 major terrorist attacks. The numbers hit the room like artillery shells. Even Sarah, who had been briefed on these details the night before, felt overwhelmed hearing them spoken aloud in front of her colleagues. The contrast between Thompson's accusations and her actual record was so stark it seemed impossible that both could refer to the same person. The psychological conditioning you underwent allowed you to maintain operational effectiveness while protecting your mental health and maintaining security protocols, Hayes continued. The memory suppression procedures were necessary because conventional soldiers who retained full memory of such operations typically suffered severe psychological breakdown. Colonel Wright listened with growing amazement as the scope of Sarah's actual service was revealed. The modest captain he thought he knew was actually one of the most decorated and effective operators in modern military history. Her quiet demeanor and reluctance to discuss her deployments suddenly made perfect sense. The awards and commendations that couldn't be included in Captain Martinez's official record include the Medal of Honor, 3 Silver Stars, the Distinguished Service Cross, and numerous unit citations for classified operations. Hayes read from another document. Her performance evaluations consistently rated her as exceptional in all categories. Thompson had gone completely silent, staring at the table as if hoping it would swallow him. The grandiose accusations he had made about Sarah being a fraud now seemed not just false but actively malicious. The room's atmosphere had shifted completely, with Thompson becoming the focus of suspicious stares from people who had previously supported him. "Sergeant Thompson," Director Walsh addressed him directly, her voice cold and professional. "You've been used as a tool by hostile intelligence services to attack one of our most valuable assets. Whether you were a willing participant or an unwitting pawn is something we'll be investigating thoroughly." Thompson finally looked up, his face a mask of confusion and fear. I thought I was doing the right thing. Hassan told me that Martinez was a security risk, that she was involved in illegal operations that were endangering American soldiers. Walsh nodded as if she had expected this response. "Hassan is an expert in psychological manipulation. He identified you as someone with access to Martinez and potential resentment about her promotions. He spent months convincing you that exposing her would make you a hero." The manipulation was becoming clear to everyone in the room. Thompson had been carefully groomed to make accusations that would destroy Sarah's reputation while protecting Hassan's true identity and objectives. The sergeant had thought he was exposing corruption when he was actually serving enemy interests. "The real tragedy," Walsh continued, "is that Captain Martinez has sacrificed more for this country than most people could imagine. She's undergone experimental procedures, risked her life repeatedly, and maintained perfect operational security even when it meant appearing less accomplished than she actually was." Sarah found herself struggling with mixed emotions as her true record was revealed. Part of her felt vindicated that the accusations against her were being exposed as false, but she also felt a deep sadness about the memories she had lost and the isolation she had endured. The psychological conditioning that had made her an effective operator had also made her a stranger to herself. Moving forward, Walsh announced, "There will be several immediate changes. Captain Martinez, your security clearance is being elevated to accommodate your actual service record. You'll be transferred to a position where your skills can be properly utilized, without the constraints that led to this situation." She turned to Thompson with a much sterner expression. "Sergeant Thompson, you're under arrest for violation of security protocols and potential treason. You'll be transferred to federal custody for extensive debriefing and investigation." As military police entered to escort Thompson from the room, he turned back towards Sarah with what appeared to be genuine remorse. "Captain, I'm sorry. I really thought I was doing the right thing. I never meant for any of this to happen." Sarah nodded slightly, recognizing that Thompson had been as much a victim of manipulation as she had been. Hassan had played a sophisticated game, turning American soldiers against each other while advancing his own agenda. The real enemy had remained hidden, while chaos erupted among the people trying to serve their country. Colonel Wright stood as the formal proceedings concluded, still trying to process everything he had learned. "Captain Martinez, I owe you an apology, sir. This base owes you an apology. If I had known the true nature of your service," Sarah raised her hand gently. "Sir, you couldn't have known. The system was designed to keep that information compartmentalized. You followed proper procedures throughout this investigation." Walsh gathered her documents and prepared to leave, but paused to address Sarah directly. "Captain, your country owes you a debt that can never be fully repaid. The sacrifices you've made, including the memories you've lost, have saved countless lives. That service won't be forgotten, even if much of it must remain classified." As the intelligence officials filed out of the room, Sarah found herself alone with Colonel Wright and Major Hayes. The vindication she had hoped for had come, but it brought with it a new understanding of just how complex her life had become. She was no longer just a soldier facing false accusations. She was a valuable intelligence asset whose very existence was a threat to enemy organizations. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, voicing the question that was foremost in her mind. Wright looked at Hayes, who seemed to understand the complexity of the situation better than anyone else in the room. That depends on a lot of factors we're still evaluating. Hayes replied carefully, but one thing is certain. You're not the same person who walked into this investigation 3 weeks ago. Sarah knew Hayes was right. The revelations about her classified service had changed everything, not just her military status, but her understanding of herself. She was beginning to remember fragments of missions she had forgotten, to piece together a history that was far more dangerous and significant than she had realized. The woman everyone had known as Captain Sarah Martinez was about to evolve into something else entirely. The question was whether she was ready for the responsibilities and dangers that came with her true identity. 2 days after the explosive revelation in Colonel Wright's conference room, General Marcus Harrison sat in his Pentagon office staring at a file that had fundamentally changed his understanding of modern warfare. As one of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Harrison had access to some of the military's most closely guarded secrets. But the document spread across his mahogany desk contained information that surprised even him. The file was marked with classification levels that required special authorization to access, stamped with warnings about national security implications, and cross-referenced with operations that had shaped global politics for the past decade. At the center of it all was Captain Sarah Martinez, a soldier whose true impact on American military operations was only now becoming clear to the highest levels of command. General Harrison had been briefed on thousands of military operations during his distinguished career. He had overseen campaigns involving tens of thousands of troops, coordinated with intelligence agencies on operations spanning multiple continents, and made decisions that affected the lives of millions of people. But he had never encountered a single individual whose personal record read like a summary of America's most successful covert operations.
This can't be accurate, Harrison muttered to himself as he reviewed Sarah's kill count for the 3rd time. 137 confirmed eliminations. The number was staggering not just for its size, but for the precision and strategic importance of each individual target. These weren't random casualties of war. They were carefully selected high-value individuals whose removal had systematically dismantled terrorist networks and criminal organizations. The general's aide, Colonel Jennifer Park, knocked and entered with additional files requested by Harrison earlier that morning. Park was one of the few officers with sufficient clearance to assist with this level of classified material, and her expression suggested she was equally stunned by what the investigation had revealed. "Sir," Park began, setting down the new documents carefully, "I've cross-referenced Captain Martinez's operations with major strategic outcomes from the past 5 years. The correlation is remarkable. Every significant disruption of terrorist financing, every major capture of enemy leadership, every successful prevention of attacks on American soil, her fingerprints are somewhere in the operational chain." Harrison opened one of the new files and found detailed analyses of how Sarah's individual missions had contributed to larger strategic objectives. The elimination of a single terrorist financier in Yemen had led to the collapse of funding for 3 separate bombing plots. The capture of intelligence from a compound in Syria had prevented coordinated attacks on European capitals. Each mission had created ripple effects that influenced global security. "Look at this," Harrison said, pointing to a timeline that mapped Sarah's deployments against major geopolitical events. The Arab Spring, the collapse of several terrorist organizations, the prevention of nuclear materials from reaching hostile actors. She was involved in operations that influenced all of these outcomes. The scope of Sarah's influence was becoming clear to Harrison in ways that were both impressive and troubling. A single operator, working largely alone, had shaped international events to a degree typically associated with entire military divisions. The psychological conditioning that had allowed her to function effectively had also created a weapon of unprecedented precision and lethality. "General," Park said hesitantly, "there's something else you need to see. The intelligence report on Sergeant Thompson's handlers reveals that targeting Captain Martinez was part of a much larger operation." Harrison looked up from his reading with sharp attention. The case that had started as a simple disciplinary matter on a military base was revealing connections that extended far beyond what anyone had initially suspected. Park opened another file and spread out a series of photographs and intelligence summaries. Ahmad Hassan, the operative who manipulated Thompson, is connected to a network that's been specifically targeting American special operators.
Captain Martinez wasn't their only objective. She was part of a systematic campaign to identify and neutralize our most effective covert assets. The photographs showed Hassan meeting with various individuals across multiple countries, each encounter carefully documented by intelligence surveillance. The pattern that emerged was of a sophisticated operation designed to map America's classified military capabilities and eliminate key personnel. They've been hunting our best people, Harrison realized, studying the evidence with growing alarm. Martinez was targeted because she was so effective that enemy organizations considered her a strategic threat. The implications were staggering. If hostile intelligence services had developed the capability to identify and target America's most classified operators, then the entire structure of covert operations was potentially compromised. Sarah's case might be just the first indication of a much larger security breach.
Sir, Park continued, the psychological profiles suggest that Hassan's network specifically looks for operators who have undergone memory suppression. They seem to understand that these individuals are likely to be involved in the most sensitive operations.
Harrison felt a chill as he considered the ramifications. The experimental program that had created soldiers like Sarah Martinez had also potentially made them vulnerable to enemy targeting. The very procedures designed to protect operational security might have become a way for hostile forces to identify valuable targets. Get me a complete list of all operators who participated in similar programs, Harrison ordered. I want to know if Martinez is the only one who's been targeted, or if this is part of a broader campaign against our classified personnel. As Park left to gather the requested information, Harrison continued reviewing Sarah's file with new understanding. The woman who had been accused of being a fraud was actually so effective that international terrorist organizations had launched a sophisticated operation specifically to destroy her. The irony was bitter. Her very success had made her a target for the kind of character assassination she had just endured. The phone on Harrison's desk rang with the distinctive tone reserved for the most secure lines. The caller identification showed it was Director Walsh from the Defense Intelligence Agency, the woman who had intervened in Sarah's case just days earlier. General Harrison, Walsh began without preamble. I assume you've had time to review Captain Martinez's classified record. We need to discuss the broader implications of what we've discovered.
Harrison leaned back in his chair, preparing for what he sensed would be a difficult conversation. Director, I've been in the military for 35 years, and I've never seen anything quite like this. The scope of her operations, the strategic impact, the level of enemy attention she's attracted, it's unprecedented. Walsh's voice carried the weight of someone dealing with a crisis that was still unfolding. General Martinez represents both our greatest success and, potentially, our greatest vulnerability. The program that created her produced the most effective covert operator in modern history, but it also created someone who's now a high-priority target for every terrorist organization we've disrupted. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, as Harrison and Walsh discussed the complex security implications of Sarah's situation. Her effectiveness as an operator was matched by the danger her very existence posed to ongoing operations. Enemy forces had demonstrated their willingness to invest significant resources in neutralizing her, and they had shown sophisticated understanding of American psychological conditioning programs. What's our recommendation for her future assignment? Harrison asked as the conversation neared its conclusion. Walsh paused before answering, clearly weighing multiple competing priorities. That's complicated, General. She's too valuable to retire, too dangerous to deploy conventionally, and too much of a target to place in routine assignments. We're looking at options that would allow her to continue operating while providing maximum security. After ending the call with Walsh, Harrison spent another hour reviewing Sarah's complete record. The more he read, the more impressed he became with both her capabilities and her character. Despite undergoing experimental psychological conditioning, despite losing access to many of her own memories, despite facing false accusations from someone she trusted, Sarah had maintained her integrity and commitment to serving her country. The kill count that had initially shocked Harrison began to take on different meaning as he understood the context of each elimination. These weren't the actions of someone who killed indiscriminately, but of a surgical instrument used to remove specific threats to American interests and civilian populations. Every target had been carefully selected, every mission thoroughly planned, every outcome strategically significant.
Harrison found himself thinking about the soldiers under his command, the thousands of men and women who served with distinction in conventional roles. Sarah Martinez represented something different, a person who had been transformed into a weapon so precise and effective that she had single-handedly influenced the course of international events. But she was also, he realized from reading her psychological profiles, fundamentally still a person struggling with the same challenges faced by any soldier. The experimental procedures had enhanced her capabilities without eliminating her humanity. She felt guilt about the lives she had taken, concern for the soldiers she served with, and confusion about her own identity after having so many memories suppressed. The phone rang again, this time showing a call from Colonel Wright at the base where Sarah's ordeal had unfolded. Harrison answered, curious to hear the perspective of the officer who had overseen the investigation without knowing its true significance. "General," Wright began, his voice reflecting the strain of recent events, "I wanted to update you personally on Captain Martinez's situation. The revelation about her classified service has completely transformed the atmosphere on my base. Soldiers who believed Thompson's accusations are struggling to understand how they were so completely deceived." Harrison could hear the weight of command responsibility in Wright's voice. The colonel was grappling with the realization that one of his soldiers had been targeted by enemy agents, while others had been manipulated into attacking her character. "How is Captain Martinez handling everything?" Harrison asked, genuinely concerned about Sarah's psychological state given everything she had endured. Wright considered the question carefully before responding. "She's remarkably composed, sir. But I can see the strain. Learning about operations she can't fully remember, discovering that she's been targeted by international terrorists, dealing with the aftermath of false accusations. It's a lot for anyone to process." The conversation reinforced Harrison's growing conviction that Sarah Martinez deserved not just vindication, but recognition for service that had gone far beyond the normal call of duty. The experimental program she had participated in represented both the best and most troubling aspects of modern military innovation. Tremendous capability achieved at significant personal cost. Colonel Park returned with the comprehensive analysis Harrison had requested. The results were sobering, but not entirely surprising. Sarah was one of only 12 soldiers who had completed the full psychological conditioning program. Of those 12, 3 had suffered complete mental breakdowns and required permanent psychiatric care. 2 others had been killed in action during classified operations. 4 had been quietly retired with full benefits and new identities to protect them from retaliation. That left only 3 active operators with backgrounds similar to Sarah's. An intelligence analysis suggested that all 3 were likely targets of the same network that had gone after her. The enemy's strategy was becoming clear. Systematically eliminate America's most effective covert assets by any means necessary. "Sir," Park said as she finished her presentation, "the intelligence community is recommending immediate protective measures for all surviving program participants. The threat level is considered extremely high based on the sophistication of the operation against Captain Martinez." Harrison nodded grimly as he considered the broader implications. The experimental program that had created Sarah and her peers represented years of research, training, and resources. Losing these operators to enemy action would be a significant blow to American intelligence capabilities, but protecting them presented equally challenging problems. As the afternoon wore on, Harrison found himself repeatedly returning to Sarah's kill count. 137 confirmed eliminations. Each number represented a life ended by Sarah's hand, but also potential American lives saved by removing dangerous individuals from operational capacity. The mathematics of war had rarely been so starkly illustrated in a single person's record. The general began drafting a recommendation that would fundamentally change how the military viewed and protected its most classified assets. Sarah Martinez's case had revealed vulnerabilities in operational security that demanded immediate attention, but it had also demonstrated the incredible value of operators who could influence strategic outcomes at the individual level. By evening, Harrison had completed his review and reached conclusions that would reshape American covert operations for years to come. Captain Sarah Martinez was about to become the center of new policies designed to protect the military's most valuable and vulnerable assets. But first she would receive recognition that had been delayed far too long by the necessities of operational security. The Pentagon Ceremonial Hall was not typically used for classified events, but today it hosted one of the most unusual award ceremonies in military history. Only 37 people were cleared to attend, including senior officials from multiple intelligence agencies, decorated military officers, and a handful of politicians with the highest security clearances. At the center of it all stood Captain Sara Martinez, wearing her dress uniform with ribbons that told only part of her story. General Harrison stood at the podium, holding a folder containing citations and commendations that had been classified for years. The weight of the moment was evident in his expression as he prepared to publicly acknowledge sacrifices and achievements that had remained hidden in the shadows of national security. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrison began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades in service to his country, "we gather today to recognize extraordinary service that has remained classified until circumstances demanded its revelation. Captain Sara Martinez represents the finest traditions of American military service, carried out under conditions that tested the limits of human endurance and capability." Sara stood at attention, but her mind was still processing the events that had led to this moment. 3 weeks ago, she had faced disgrace in the end of her career based on false accusations. Today, she was receiving awards that even she had not known she had earned. The journey from accused fraud to recognized hero had been surreal and transformative. The general opened his folder and began reading from the first citation. "The Medal of Honor, awarded for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty during Operation Desert Shield in Syria. Captain Martinez single-handedly infiltrated a terrorist compound holding 4 American aid workers hostage, eliminated 23 enemy combatants, and successfully extracted all hostages without casualties." As Harrison read the citation, fragments of memory began returning to Sara. She could remember the weight of her equipment as she approached the compound, the sound of gunfire echoing through concrete corridors, the relief in the hostages' eyes when they realized they were being rescued. The memories felt distant and dreamlike, but they were undeniably real. "The Distinguished Service Cross," Harrison continued, "awarded for extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an enemy force during Operation Nightshade. Captain Martinez eliminated a high-value target responsible for coordinating attacks against American forces, preventing an estimated 300 American casualties." Each award brought with it a flood of returning memories that Sara's psychological conditioning had suppressed. She began to understand the scope of what she had accomplished, but also the personal cost of achievements she couldn't fully remember until now. The woman who had volunteered for experimental psychological procedures was finally meeting the warrior those procedures had created. Director Walsh stood to address the assembled group, her expression reflecting both pride and concern. "Captain Martinez's service represents a new model of warfare, where individual operators can influence strategic outcomes traditionally requiring large military formations. Her effectiveness was so pronounced that enemy organizations specifically targeted her for elimination, leading to the false accusations that we have recently exposed." The revelation about enemy targeting still felt surreal to Sara. The idea that international terrorist organizations had invested significant resources in destroying her reputation was both validating and terrifying. She was beginning to understand that her life would never again be simple or anonymous. "The Silver Star," Harrison continued reading, "awarded for gallantry in action against an enemy force during classified operations in Afghanistan. Captain Martinez's actions resulted in the capture of intelligence that prevented coordinated terrorist attacks against civilian targets in 3 European capitals." Colonel Wright, who had traveled from his base to attend the ceremony, watched with a mixture of awe and regret. He had overseen an investigation that nearly destroyed the career of one of America's most decorated soldiers, saved only by the intervention of intelligence agencies that understood Sara's true value. The intelligence gathered during Captain Martinez's operations has been instrumental in disrupting terrorist financing, preventing weapons trafficking, and eliminating leadership structures that threatened American interests worldwide. Walsh added, "Her personal kill count of 137 confirmed eliminations represents the most successful individual record in modern covert operations. The number still shocked everyone who heard it, including Sara herself. 137 lives ended by her actions, each representing a strategic decision with consequences that rippled through global security networks. The weight of those decisions was something she was only beginning to fully comprehend. Major Hayes, who had uncovered the classified information that saved Sarah's career, felt vindicated as she watched the ceremony unfold. The investigation that had seemed impossibly complex was finally revealing its true significance, not just as a case of false accusations, but as an example of how America's most valuable assets could be vulnerable to sophisticated enemy operations. The Purple Heart, Harrison announced, awarded for wounds received in action against an enemy force during operations that remain classified to this day. Captain Martinez sustained injuries while protecting civilian populations from terrorist attacks, demonstrating the highest standards of military valor. Sarah unconsciously touched her shoulder, where a scar marked an injury she could now remember receiving during a mission in Somalia. The enemy had been using civilian shields, and she had exposed herself to hostile fire to ensure no innocent people were harmed during her operation. The memory was painful but also clarifying. She had always tried to minimize civilian casualties, even when it increased her own risk. As the ceremony continued, Sarah began to understand that the awards were not just recognition of past service, but preparation for future responsibilities. The exposure of her classified record meant that she could never again operate in the shadows as she had before. Her identity was now known to enemy organizations worldwide, making traditional covert operations impossible. Captain Martinez, General Harrison addressed her directly. Your service has demonstrated capabilities that represent the future of American military operations. However, the revelation of your identity also creates new challenges for your continued effectiveness and personal safety. Sarah had been expecting this conversation. The intelligence briefings over the past week had made clear that her situation was unprecedented. She was too valuable to retire, too recognizable for traditional covert work, and too much of a target to place in routine assignments. Therefore, Harrison continued, you are being assigned to a new position that will allow you to continue serving your country while addressing the unique circumstances of your situation. You will be leading the development and training of the next generation of operators who may face similar challenges. The assignment made sense from multiple perspectives. Sarah's experience with psychological conditioning, her understanding of covert operations, and her first-hand knowledge of enemy tactics made her uniquely qualified to train others. It would also provide her with protection by surrounding her with skilled personnel and maintaining her access to classified resources. Director Walsh stepped forward with a final folder. Captain Martinez, there are additional recognition documents that will remain classified, but I want you to know that your service has been noted at the highest levels of government. The President himself has been briefed on your record and has expressed his personal gratitude for your sacrifices. The mention of presidential recognition was overwhelming for Sarah. She had never sought glory or public acknowledgement for her service, but knowing that her sacrifices had been noted by the Commander-in-Chief provided a sense of validation that she hadn't realized she needed. As the ceremony concluded, Sarah found herself surrounded by colleagues and officials who wanted to express their respect and gratitude. The woman who had been isolated and accused just weeks earlier was now being treated as a hero by people who understood the true scope of her service. Colonel Wright approached her with an expression of genuine remorse. Captain, I owe you an apology that goes beyond the official proceedings. I failed to protect one of my soldiers from false accusations, and I allowed enemy manipulation to nearly destroy your career. Sarah accepted his apology graciously, understanding that Wright had been operating without access to information that would have changed his perspective entirely. Sir, you followed proper procedures throughout the investigation. The system worked, even if it took longer than any of us would have preferred. Sergeant Thompson's fate had been determined in closed proceedings that Sarah was not privy to, but she had been told that his cooperation with federal investigators had been valuable in understanding enemy operations. He would face consequences for his actions, but his willingness to provide information about Hassan's network had helped protect other potential targets. The woman who left the Pentagon that afternoon was fundamentally different from the accused fraud who had entered the base investigation weeks earlier. Sarah Martinez was now officially recognized as one of America's most effective warriors, but she was also someone whose life had been permanently changed by the revelation of secrets that had been hidden even from herself. Her new assignment would begin in 2 weeks, giving her time to process the psychological impact of recovered memories and prepare for responsibilities that would shape the future of American covert operations. She would train others to face the challenges she had overcome, sharing hard-won knowledge about survival in a world where the most dangerous enemies often wore friendly faces. As she drove away from the Pentagon, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this point. The false accusations that had nearly destroyed her career had ultimately led to recognition that might otherwise have remained classified forever. The enemy operation designed to neutralize her had instead revealed her true value to the people who mattered most. The psychological conditioning that had created her capabilities was beginning to fade as her memories returned. She was becoming whole again, integrating the experiences that had been fragmented by experimental procedures. For the first time in years, she felt like she understood who she truly was. The kill count that had shocked General Harrison no longer felt like an abstract number to Sarah. Each elimination represented a decision made under extreme pressure, a life ended to protect others, a strategic objective achieved through personal sacrifice. She carried the weight of those decisions, but she also carried the knowledge that her actions had saved countless innocent lives. Captain Sarah Martinez was no longer just a soldier following orders. She was a warrior who had shaped history, a teacher who would influence the future, and a symbol of what American military personnel could achieve when supported by their country and trusted with its most important missions. The woman who had been accused of lying about her service record had revealed herself to be someone whose true story was more remarkable than anyone could have imagined. Her kill count had shocked a general, but her character had impressed everyone who learned her real story. She had survived false accusations, enemy targeting, and psychological manipulation to emerge as a recognized hero whose service would be remembered long after the classified details became obsolete. The journey from accused fraud to decorated warrior was complete. But Sarah's story was just beginning. The next chapter would involve passing her knowledge to others, protecting them from the mistakes that had nearly cost her everything, and ensuring that America's most valuable military assets received the recognition and protection they deserved. She drove toward a future that was uncertain, but no longer shadowed by doubt about her own identity. Captain Sarah Martinez knew exactly who she was, what she had accomplished, and what she still needed to do. The lies had been exposed, the truth had emerged, and justice had finally been served.